When I was a kid, probably about 10, I had a bunk bed that was directly beneath the attic entrance. It was a house built in 1914. After the family who built it was gone, my ancestors moved in and owned the house since the late 30s and 40s. There was a lot of paranormal shit that happened growing up in that house. Too much of a list for people to want to read, but one event stands out the most. That attic entrance was just a wooden panel. No fancy staircase or ladder that dropped down, a very small panel. I was always curious about what was in the attic, so I got on my bunk bed and looked through the crack. Inside, I saw a whole room that didn't exist. This was an old attic that wasn't strong enough to hold anything to store because it would break the ceiling. I saw bright, sunlit windows that weren't there, with curtains that were wiggling and flowing from an air source. There was also a bed with what looked like a curly, fancy Victorian canopy frame. I was drawn to look at the bed and started following the frame to the ceiling. There was a long pole on the headboard that was unnecessarily tall, and I couldn't see the top. So I adjusted the wood panel and started to slowly follow the pole upwards. I got really afraid and instinctively felt like I shouldn't see what was at the top of that pole. I also had this instinct that there was a person in the attic, and they were near the top of that pole, and I didn't want to see them. I ran downstairs to my parents and asked them to check the attic because of what I saw. I know it wasn't a dream because my parents remember me running to them and telling them what I saw. I also intentionally climbed onto the bed to look in the attic rather than having been asleep. Any kind of folklore explanation for this? Matrix glitch? When I was little, about 4, my parents had moved us out of a townhouse and into a 3-bedroom house. It was dirt cheap due to being a foreclosure, and the bank that had foreclosed on it just wanted to sell the thing. My parents snapped it up, loving the neighbourhood, and that the house was across the street from the primary school my older sister and I would be attending. It also had a lovely view of a branch of a major river in the area in the backyard. Looking back on it, it sounds like the beginning of many haunting movies. The day my parents had gotten the key to the house and the papers saying they officially owned it, they'd gone in for a final inspection before bringing me and my sister into the house. Everything was in order until they got to the stairs leading to the attic. On the middle step leading up was a dead rat, laid out in a perfect straight line, almost like somebody had placed it there. My mom got concerned because rats, and my dad brushed it off as something he'll tackle and take care of. So we move in. Almost immediately, my sister and I start hearing a voice in our closet at night, but we can't make out what it's saying. Some nights it sounds like it's humming, others whispers, and anytime we hear it, we flee our room to sleep in the living room. My mom worked nights while my dad worked days, guaranteeing someone was home to watch the kids. My grandma came by during the days to let my mom sleep. Grandma knew we didn't like our room because of the closet, so when she spent the night, she let us stay in the guest room with her. Now, the doors leading to the laundry room, where the stairs to the attic were super heavy and jammed with remarkable ease. My dad had to body slam the doors to get them to open, and my sister and I had no hope of ever opening the doors. We were too small. My mom came home one morning from work, and as per her routine, checked on me and my sister in our room. Only, I wasn't in bed. So she checks hers and my dad's room. I'm still not there. She's panicking and checking all the rooms, and I'm not there. She's ready to call the cops, then suddenly hears me screaming and crying. It's coming from the attic. She body slams her way into the stairs room and rips the attic door open, and finds me hysterically crying. Mom's had enough, and resolved to move us out. When we finally moved out, my dad chose to stay, and my parents eventually divorced. So my sister and I still had to go back to the house every other weekend. But upon leaving the house, my mom puts in a hard inquiry into the house history and finds that the bank neglected to inform my parents that a woman had been raped and murdered in the house, and a body was found in the attic, above where my bedroom closet was. My mom is still livid about it to this day, over 20 years later. The house I spent my growing up years in was mostly nice. Just in the way that we didn't have any dead rats laid out on our steps upon moving in like our previously owned house. No horrible house history my mom could dig up. We moved in years after moving out of our haunted house, and in the in between years lived rather uneventfully in a rental. We moved into the new house the year I turned 8. At this point, it was no longer just me and my older sister. I now had a younger sister too. When we moved into the house, we each claimed a bedroom. My older sister, 10, took the biggest room. I took the middle, and my younger sister, around 2 or 3, took the room at the end of the hall by the bathroom. We thought it was a pretty sweet gig. We each got our own space. Until our first morning in the house, after sleeping in the house. My older sister and I go to the living room to find my younger sister on the couch. Something had spooked her in the night and she felt more comfortable on the couch. Her dad was confused, as my sister was not a very spookable toddler, but something scared her badly enough to flee her room. My mom remembers the old house and isn't forcing my sister to stay in her room. If she's that uncomfortable, she can share a room with me or my older sister. Everyone agrees. Years pass. My younger sister tries multiple times to brave her room at night, but she always feels watched. Specifically, like whatever is watching her is watching from the closet. So she full on barricaded her closet shut, but it didn't help. Her handiwork was always moved by the morning. I even woke up a few times at 3 a.m. to the sound of heavy objects moving, followed by the panicked pitter-patter of my sister fleeing to my room. I always let her stay in my room if she wanted. I remember the old house. More years pass, and my mom gets a new boyfriend, and along comes my baby brother. I'm 12 by then, younger sister 6, and she jumps at the chance to give her room to the baby. Except even my brother is scared of his new room from the get-go. He won't fall asleep in there, and instead screams until carried out. He won't stay asleep in there either, and wakes within minutes to resume shrieking. From the instant he could walk, he'd climbed out of his crib, fled his room, and rested in the living room. My older sister and I would give up on our late-night gaming because our brother would escape his room and seek out comfort of the couch, and we didn't want to keep taking him back up to that room. It was giving us weird vibes, and we actually avoided going in ourselves. We always felt watched, like whatever was watching us wanted to do us harm. If our brother did sleep the entire night in the room, he always woke with a bruise. We stopped asking him to stay in there. We let him claim the couch. We're out of that house now too, and my brother still fears closets. Myself and my siblings all still fear closets. It was summer of 2017, and I was at one of my best friend Ed's house. His family and my family linked up a lot due to how close our families are with one another. But anyways, I want to say it was mid-July, shortly after my birthday. We were going to have a little fire in the yard and have a few beers. It started raining, and rained for a couple of hours. It stopped raining, and I was getting ready to go home, but something made a weird noise outside. So Ed, his son Craig, and myself went outside to see what it was. We found nothing out of the ordinary. We went inside, and I looked at the garage can lid, and I saw a handprint, a huge one. It had long nails and everything. It kind of freaked us out. So we kept looking around and saw something. We all saw the same thing. The door to the abandoned house next door opens. Not a creep, but not real fast either. So we all looked at each other and decided whatever it was that wanted us to go in there. We grabbed better flashlights and some ghost hunting equipment we had. We wanted to get into ghost hunting anyways. Our first ghost hunt, cool, let's go. Craig went in first and was pushed against the wall in the living room and couldn't move. It took Ed, Ethan, Craig's friend, and myself to pull him off the wall. We shook it off and started asking questions and using our EVP recorder. We didn't really catch much, nothing to excite us, so we started recording in night vision, and I went to the far bedroom. I was recording, asking questions, and doing whatever else ghost hunters do, looking for evidence of them. I turned to look in the closet of the room, and I saw what looked like a witch, or something disguising itself as one. I panicked and ran out of the room to get Ed. Whatever it was, knew a little too much about Ed's father, who had passed away some years ago. We were all scared at this point in time, so we wrap up and I go to leave. I was the last one leaving the house, just to make sure everything was closed up, even though it was abandoned. We went into the side out through the kitchen, so that's where we were exiting from, and I got shoved out the house so hard, I ended up hitting the ground on the way out the door. That's not even the worst part. After that, there was a time period of probably 35 or 40 minutes that I can't recall anything from. I still don't know what happened within that time, but when I came to, I was puking out what looked and felt like black tar. One of the scariest moments of my life. I went into that house 3 times after, and there was absolutely nothing there like there was the first time I went in. So back in 2011 to 2013, I worked at a college in Youngstown, Ohio, called YSU, Youngstown State University. This happened over a course of 2 nights, and it's roughly August 2012. The first night, I had a dream of a little girl wearing a white and blue dress. I would say it was an 1800s style dress. I had a horrible nightmare about something that had happened when I was young. Not going into details about it. Anyways, after I woke up, I was already shook from the dream. I ended up falling right back to sleep. I had seen this girl in my dream, and she had an extremely evil laugh. I still haven't forgotten the sound of it, and I never will. I wake up the next day, everything was normal. I had taken a picture with my girlfriend at the time, my niece. I was holding my nephew, because he was still a baby, and in the background of the picture, a huge towering shadow figure with red eyes. Of course, over 8 years or so, before I had an Android or iPhone, I lost the picture. I tried looking for it on Facebook and I couldn't find it. Back to the story. I was weirded out, obviously, but shrugged it off. It's now 8:30, and I'm getting to the Lincoln building to make sure everything was cleaned and locked up. That building was supposedly haunted, but I never saw nor heard anything until this night, in 2 years of working in that building. I get to the 4th floor, everything goes as planned. I get down to the 3rd floor, unlock the door to the computer room, and I see the same little girl that I saw in my dream the previous tonight. Needless to say, I was scared as fuck, and I literally ran through the rest of the rooms, making sure they were locked up. After 5 minutes or so, I reached the first door. I rushed to get the doors locked. Mind you, I'm shaking scared. Also, the only person in the building, out of nowhere, as I'm locked up in the last classroom, or I hear, "I'm sorry," in a little girl's voice. And that was literally the end of that. I haven't seen or heard that little girl in a dream since, and it's the same as that shadow man. Weird as fuck, right? Let me know what you think it was, and what it was about. My sister-in-law wanted my wife and I to go to a karaoke bar to meet a new boyfriend. We were a little reluctant, because we'd never done it before and it seemed silly. Anyway, it was a hole-in-the-wall run-down joint that had been around for about 30 years at that time, the early 2000s. The place was lined with old law books, broken neon signs, and tattered chairs and tables. However, the crowd was friendly, and it was a fun time overall. After a few years of going to this bar, the owner, Lou, informs me that her karaoke DJ is going to prison for murder. And could I take his place? Keep the singers in order and play the music from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. It paid $60 per night, plus tips. I agreed, and began working there the next day. It was fun, except for the rude drunks and Bubba. The first night I was in the DJ booth and in the middle of a song, a whiskey glass on the table next to my station whizzed off the table by itself and hit the bookshelves at high velocity and smashed into a million pieces. I had witnessed weird stuff in the past because my parents were into seances and witchcraft, but nothing so dramatic. I turned to a long-time customer, Chip, and asked him if he saw that, and he said, "Yep, that's Bubba." I got busy and didn't think much about it until the next day. We had a staff meeting with the boss at noon before we opened. It was just a basic meeting, going over duties and planning the Christmas party. At the end, I asked Lou about Bubba. She got a weird look on her face and asked how I knew about that. I told her about the whiskey glass and what Chip had said. Lou proceeded to tell us the story of Bubba. In the late 70s, there was a trucker named Bubba, a big hairy guy, that would come in every 3 weeks or so at the end of his routes and have a few drinks at the bar. In fact, he always sat right there and pointed to the seat next to me. Bubba loved to have a cigar with his whiskey and one day was lighting one up. The cigar had gotten dry and part of the ember broke off and set his enormous beard on fire. Bubba was trying to put it out by slapping at it, but the fire was getting out of hand. The barmaid was mixing a drink at the time, and she had a shaker full of rum that she threw on Bubba's face. This proceeded to turn Bubba into an inferno, and he subsequently died. The barmaid didn't realise how flammable rum was. From that point on, Bubba haunted the bar. The rest of the staff were nonchalant about it. However, when I started working there, things got really weird. One night at 2 a.m, we closed down, locked all the doors, cleaned up, restocked the bar, and went into the office to count the money and do the payouts. It was just me and the bartender. The place was small, the doors were locked, and an alarm was set. We finished around 3 a.m, opened the office door, and all of the liquor bottles from behind the bar were arranged by size on the long table by the stage. All of them, even the back stock from beneath the counters. We were kind of in shock, not believing our eyes. The bartender said, "Must be Bubba." It took us another hour to put all the bottles back. A few months later, the same situation happened, but this time, when we left the office, every chair was turned upside down. Then during the day shift, the bartender on duty called my house in a panic, saying that all the decorative law books were flying off the shelves and other items were being violently flung around the place. I drove over and helped her clean up the mess. She quit that same day. I quit a few months later. The bar changed owners and was revamped. Not sure if Bubba is still there, up to his old tricks. I think I'm being haunted, and I don't know what to do. I moved into an old farmhouse a few years ago, about 7 years. There's a little cemetery in the front yard with about 6 gravestones, I think. It's hard to tell. My mom never has cleaned it up, and they've been dead for over 100 years or so. But in the beginning, before fully moving in, doorknobs would jiggle, only upstairs. Doors would close upstairs while we were talking in the kitchen downstairs. We just brushed it off and assumed it was because of the air coming on, or the air coming through a cracked window, pushing a door shut. We all wake up with scratches and bruises on our legs, back, arms, stomach, chest, wherever. But I'm the most affected out of everyone. I've woken up with scratches in the form of a smiley face. I've had the exact same dream, but with slight differences, involving some kind of demon. And I think I might have brought something into my house playing with Ouija boards when I was younger. When we first moved into the house, I was scared like a normal kid would be of the dark and things, but I'd see dark shadows, dark blob-like figures moving at night in the darkness in my room. I picked my room because I had a hospital bed in it and the door was bolted shut. I was super into creepy stuff and supernatural things. A week after moving in, my mom had to get cable set up and a guy came over. He did the usual stuff, but then he had to move to the basement to put the cables through the floor and everything. Being as we live on a farm, and my stepdad was the only one home during the time he was there, he had to go out and feed the cows while he was in the basement finishing up. The man said while he was working, he heard something. Not quite sure. It's been years. So we turned around, and at the top of the steps, there was this figure of a man standing in the basement doorway looking at him. He told my stepdad, and we just decided to ignore it. Weeks pass, and one night I get out of bed at like midnight or 1 a.m. to go pee, and go to pass the steps to go downstairs, and hear footsteps coming up towards me, and someone hitting their hand on the railing. I froze for a second in fear, and chose to run back to my bedroom. The following weeks after that, things would go missing as soon as we laid them down, and we'd find them in our shoes or in little silly places. They would never be like we would put down an apple on the counter and couldn't find it. And the next day, it would be in the car. Little things like that, constantly. I thought it was funny, and I told my family it was just a ghost and it was playing cute tricks on us. I gave it a name. My whole family refers to it as Robert, and when things go missing, we go, Robert, can you give it back? Or, oh, that's just Robert, etc. A year goes by, and these things are always happening. Thumps, running on the steps, things being stolen. I started to ask my mom for a Ouija board. I wanted to talk to ghosts with my friends. I wanted to scare my brothers. I played all of the dumb ghost games online like Cat Scratch, Sandman, and Bloody Mary, the Charlie Charlie game, every single scary game you looked up to play with friends at a sleepover. I was playing it. And they always worked. Not Bloody Mary, but the Cat Scratch game always worked. And I loved it. I was addicted, and I wanted more. So I moved up. I wanted a Ouija board. I wanted to talk to the real deal. I asked my mom and she was oblivious, so she bought me one. I'd play with my friends, cousins, my brothers, and by myself. Sometimes I moved it myself to scare them, and sometimes I didn't move it at all and it moved by itself. Especially when I did it alone. And I thought it was a dumb trick the board did so people would buy it. I was a child. I didn't know any better. After I started using the Ouija board, I stopped for a while, and things died down a lot in the house. For a while. The only thing that would happen was I would see the shadows at night all the time. Dark black blobs sometimes. They had arms that would come out of the dark masses that they were. My stepdad was outside one day, and his truck was off. The keys weren't even in, and the truck revved its engine. I remember my dad telling me this clearly. I even asked my ex-boyfriend to back the story up for me because I told him as soon as it happened. And he told me it did happen, and he remembered. I asked my family about it just recently, and they told me they had no recollection of it ever happening. No one remembered it at all. Everything seems to be progressively getting worse. A few months ago, I was watching Family Guy and glanced down at my phone for a second and glanced back up. And the whole family was standing on the screen staring at me, and the whole screen was black with a darkish red tint, and their eyes were black, so black, and blood was gushing out of their mouths, but it was dark red, just like the dark black tint the screen was, but more red. I was so scared I started to cry, and looked down at my phone trying to call someone. I looked back up, and it was back to normal. I tried researching if it was a part of the episode and asked so many people, but no one could tell me anything. Recently, I've been getting more scratches, and even scratches in the form of smiley faces and deep, dark purple bruises. And my mom gets those more than anyone else in the house. And my mom, when she sleeps, she does astral projection. I think that's what it's called. Out-of-body experience. She watches herself sleep at night. And she told me once she was watching her and my stepdad sleep, and she saw this hand come out from under my bed and grab his ankle and start to pull him. She then tried to wake him up, but couldn't, and ended up waking herself up. I asked her about that recently as well, and she said she had no recollection of that either, but my brothers remembered her talking about it. More recently, I'll be trying to sleep, almost asleep, and my shirt will start to rise up and I'll feel the weird tingly feeling on my skin and have to pull my shirt down and will then be fully awake and freaking out. I'll hear music. A few days ago, I heard what sounded like carousel music coming from outside my room at 3 a.m. The stomps and running up the steps happen almost every night. But the main reason I'm posting this is because recently I've been telling whatever has been hurting me and my family to go away and leave me alone. An online friend has been saying it over the phone as well. And a week or so ago, I had a dream that me and my boyfriend were on the phone, and I got scared for some reason. The dream felt super real. So he told me to tell it to go away. So I proceeded to tell whatever it was to go away and laughed and kept repeating. The third time I said go away after I had laughed, it was not my voice anymore. It was the scariest fucking voice I'd ever heard in my life. The most demonic voice I've ever fucking heard. I'm tearing up right now just typing this. And I couldn't control my voice or what I was saying anymore, and I just kept saying go away in that demonic voice. And my boyfriend, who was on the phone in the dream, was so scared. I finally got my voice back. I was crying and I said sorry, but it scared me so bad, I woke up shaking and crying. I woke up with some scratches after the dream, but they weren't that bad. Last night, I had the exact same dream, except instead of him using me to speak, I started to breathe really hard and spit started to come out of my mouth. My eyes started to roll to the back of my head, and my boyfriend started freaking again. And I started to cry again. And it stopped, but this time my boyfriend said, I think I'm gonna go, because he was scared. And I begged him not to leave me alone. And that's when the demonic voice came through the phone this time. I got scared and hung up in the dream. After hanging up, the voice kept going through the phone. I couldn't understand what he was saying because I was scared and then I woke up. Last night, before this dream happened, I woke up 50 times and was so exhausted that the last time I woke up before I had the dream, I felt something sit down on my bed. But I was too exhausted to stay awake, so I just curled up into a ball. And before I went to bed, hours before, my brother had showed me these huge, really bad scratches on his leg. They were super long and almost to the point of bleeding. My stepdad also had a nightmare last night, but I haven't gotten around to asking him what it was yet. I've also been dealing with super bad migraines for months now that have been so bad to the point where I have had to curl up in a ball with sunglasses and a hoodie over my head with no noise just to get any comfort. I wake up in the mornings nauseous, gagging, and have been put on multiple migraine medicines. The pills I'm on now seem to be helping, but I still have them sometimes and still get nauseous in the mornings. I used to vomit midday at the house. Date of investigation, 2nd of July 2022. Every paranormal investigator has had one of those evenings during an investigation. You're trying to get a reading on your EMF or attempting to find cold or hot spots with the thermal monitor. However, you find absolutely nothing. But you carry on and explore further because you know the history of the location and you're determined to find something, anything, to prove that ghosts exist, to verify to the skeptics that there is life after death. I find indoor locations to be the most interesting. They're quiet and enclosed, and you can really see everything within your peripheral vision. What makes it better is that you can hear the activity in the other rooms that you can't visually see, making the atmosphere feel incredibly eerie, something that gives paranormal investigators their rush to want more. What a fantastic experience our location was. It was filled with incredibly prepared, determined, and ready investigators, bringing along the necessary equipment that would surely grab the spirit's attention. One of the most pivotal moments in the night was the use of the REM pod. We had all transferred to the second floor, and we had 2 bedroom-styled rooms. We decided to set up equipment in both rooms. Room 1 had the REM pod located in the centre of the room, along with one chair next to the window. We decided to place the pod in this location because investigators had past encounters in this room, feeling the darkness that was located in the corner, emitting the feeling of being watched. I must admit, going into that room for the first time made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A paranormal investigator's mind must be prepared to feel all sorts of strange and challenging emotions within a possible haunted area. I suppose it didn't help that the building was physically deteriorating, emulating an already spooky feeling in the room. The second room didn't have as much of a threatening feeling compared to the other room, so we placed a foldable mirror on top of the fireplace, which, along with a dim room, allowed the spirits to travel between the two realms much more easily. I think this gave some of the group a different sense in this room, but at least the doorway to alternate realms wasn't near the raging REM pod. Once everything was in place, we attempted the inverted seance, a highly used practice to try and feel the presence of anything paranormal, either in front or around us. What made this a credible execution was having all of the investigators facing out while standing in a circle holding hands. You have that knowledge of complete stillness from the group. Additionally, it eliminates the possibility of the potential breathing on one another and accidentally thinking it's a spirit passing you. Everything was in place and we were ready to start contacting the spirit realm. I could tell some of us were feeling a little uneasy, but we had to push forward. Upon performing the inverted seance, the majority of the investigators felt a sudden increase in temperature, whereby they were sweating and complaining that it was very hot. I, on the other hand, didn't feel this phenomenon. Could I be the one affected at this point, rather than everyone else in the room? It was something I definitely considered. Furthermore, the entire group, including myself, felt extreme dizziness, to the point where we were all felt like passing out. I'm not sure any of us had felt anything quite as powerful, that had the power to affect 8 different people all at once. During this session, the REM pod, located in the other room, consistently reacted to something in the room. At the beginning of the investigation, we all scanned the area using an EMF reader to see if there was any intrusion of magnetic fields throughout the entire property, for which we received absolutely no readings. Not only that, but the property is known to have very little power running through. At this point in the investigation, I felt as though this could have been one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that we've ever witnessed. We needed someone to go to that room alone with a camera and record it, as it's been detecting some kind of magnetic field for over 10 minutes. Realizing that the REM pod was reacting so vigorously to our seance in the other room, we all decided to move on to part 2 of the experiment, which was to attempt a human pendulum test, in which all investigators except one stand in a circle, while the last group member stands in the middle. The members creating the circle will ask the spirits, who will respond through the middle member, to sway the central member in a direction that would determine the word yes, and again for the word no. I had never taken part in the human pendulum in the past, as I had always gone to explore different areas of past investigations, so this was new to me, and I was excited to see how this worked. The group started the experiment. We found this experiment particularly interesting. Not only was the member in the center of the circle responding to the questions, but the REM pod created a different pattern, which only pulsed after we received answers, which was fascinating to see as a first-time participant. We managed to get a clip of the REM pod reacting to nothing in the room. However, we were not able to collect enough evidence to show the activity that was being performed in the other room. Hopefully, in the future, I'll be much more prepared to show you that the paranormal does indeed exist. This property will definitely be one to return to. So with background and context in mind, I'm not really the biggest spiritual believer. I mean, I do have belief in some sort of paranormal. When I was younger, I was big into paranormal stuff, like literally going out and investigating these things with friends. Over the years, I kind of settled down and I became more religious again, Catholic. So I don't necessarily believe in any specific sort of ghosts, more so like demons or whatever. But something in me still does hold belief for these things. Currently, I'm staying in a different country because I've flopped back and forth over the years, and I'm here to stay with my mom and grandfather for a bit. Basically, this house is very, very old, which for some of you more spiritual ones might ring a bell. Anyways, I'm not precisely sure just how old this place is, but it's been around a long time. Longer than me, or potentially my mother has. The floors are very old and creaky, the pipes still make noise, and the furnace in the basement cracks every now and then. Like I said, very old place. So recently, I've been keeping watch over the place every now and then, and doing some work around here while my family goes into the local city to take care of business, such as the bank, dentist, etc. Anyways, most of the encounters I've been experiencing have been while I'm the only one in the house, and it gets much quieter. There's a basement which leads into the kitchen, and it's quite open layout, meaning you can see into the basement from the kitchen, but it's also quite dark and old. So the other day, I was lounging in the basement while they were out, doing my usual like cooking, eating, whatever, and I glanced out of the corner of my eye to the top of the stairs railing. And as I looked, I swore I could see some sort of figure that I clearly made out to be a young girl, wearing a greyish white flower pattern dress, like the ones that were popular around 1930s, 40s and 50s. However, it only stayed briefly while I glanced, so I didn't get to look for longer than a split second out of the corner of my eye. Now, me being paranoid and whatnot, kept glancing back, and just about every other glance or every other third glance, I get another peek of the figure there, yet again. I started talking to a friend of mine on the phone to keep myself from being bored, and I kept hearing these noises, such as the floor squeaking as if under mild pressure, the whispering sound nearby, and also just an overall eerie and gloomy feeling. Personally, what makes me feel better in these sorts of situations, being religious and all, is to do something, well, religious. So I went upstairs briefly to grab my rosary and whatnot, and I did my thing, and felt a lot better after. Now, this happened a couple of years ago. I was sharing my room with my brother due to the family apartment being pretty small. I remember it being around 11 or midnight, and I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my social media. In the other corner of our room was our bookshelf, with my brother's desk and PC. Then, I heard a voice clearly reading out my name. It was obviously a grown man around my dad's age. However, I could clearly hear my dad snoring in the other room, and I'm very sure the source of the voice was within my room, but I couldn't see anything there. It was empty. The PC was closed, and there was nothing that could be the source of the voice that called my name. My first reaction was to turn off my phone and then get in bed and wait there, which might have been a dumb move, but hey, I wasn't harmed after all, so I would call that a success. Another thing that happened in the same corner is when my brother left his PC on because of a download going on, and in the middle of the night, just as I was falling asleep, I was woken up by the PC randomly turning on its text-to-speech and starting to reading out what's on the screen. I'm not even sure if it was reading out the screen since I was too sleepy to process what the text-to-speech voice was saying. I remember it saying weird stuff, but we assumed it was reading the download page. The voice alerted the whole family, but nothing really came of it. They didn't speak of the incident after that night, and they just forgot and moved on, I guess. I had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, ranging from heavy objects being knocked over, feeling someone touching my hair or my shoulder, doors shutting on their own, and I've even seen a shadow person once. But this has been the one that affected me most since I have no idea what it could mean, and it greatly involved me. I was asleep and woke up instinctively out of the blue, and felt as if something was there and saw a fairly large oblong orb. Think around an American football size and shape, floating at the foot of my bed. It floated up the wall about 4 feet and slowly started drifting along the wall towards me. I jumped up out of my bed and was staring at it, floating along my wall. I then turned the light on, even though it was daylight outside already. Daylight hits around 3:30 a.m. in the summer months here. It crept along my wall, then made it to the corner of the wall next to my bed headboard, and floated up and through the ceiling. I've never experienced anything like that, and when I looked at it, it gave me the worst feeling of dread I've ever felt. I was so panicked, I had a sore chest after, and texted my sister, telling her what happened. I've been trying to find videos of similar things, but I can't find any. Maybe someone here could provide an explanation, or maybe more information on what this could be, paranormal or not. It's been on my mind all day. It almost looked like liquid mercury, but semi-transparent and had a dark glow at the same time. Hard to describe. As I said before, it had an American football or rugby ball type shape, not a typical spherical shape. Also, about a month ago, I woke up with a green light circling above my head. I don't have a history of sleep paralysis, and I was able to jump out of bed pretty fast, so I doubt it's that. I've been living in this apartment for almost a year now. Needless to say, I've had unusual experiences living there. Nothing like The Exorcist, though. I always felt a little bit unsettled there as well. When I first moved in, I had a lot of vivid dreams and sleep paralysis. Sometimes, outlines of my family members or significant others would appear, although I knew they weren't actually the people I knew and something else. As any sane person would, I ruled it out as stress. After that, things in my kitchen would fall over and I would hear creaks in my bathroom. Sometimes scratches in the ceiling which I thought were just rats. December of last year, I took pictures with my significant other on Snapchat and caught something I hoped more than anything would be just a camera smudge or just a case of a shaky hand. It was not the filter that was used either. Again, like any sane person, I brushed it off and figured it was just an issue with the camera. At the same time every night, my house would drop a few degrees, exactly at 10:30 every night. Probably the AC, but who knows? I was always concerned, but always dismissive of it, until last night. I was sleeping next to my significant other last night, when I felt something stepping lightly, like a cat, on my feet. I'm a light sleeper, so it woke me up immediately. I obviously sat up and checked, but nothing was there. I know I'm not imagining it. My significant other said he felt nothing and slept like a log. I looked online to find a medical explanation to what I felt, but it didn't feel like bugs or whatnot. I could feel small feet pushing into my bedsheets. I don't know what it was, but my questions in this is, what is it? And is it bad? I swear I didn't imagine it. I don't really know what I'm looking for. Well, I do sort of. I want someone with knowledge of the paranormal to tell me if what I experienced is deemed common in the realm of ghost sightings, which I never previously thought to be real. I'll break it down for you though. My family and I travelled to an old mansion that looked like a hotel. We arrived late and hurried into our rooms. To say the place was creepy is an understatement. It was also beautiful. We were given our rooms. I got one just down the hall from the rest of the family. As I got ready for bed, I felt super uneasy, and I remember coming back to that I didn't like how high the ceilings were. Before I continue, I'll just say I have a history of sort of hallucinogenic episodes, but haven't had one since I started my medication a couple of years ago, and I definitely took them. I settled into bed and turned off the light. It was quite dark, but there was a light just around the corner of the doorway, which was open. I lay in bed looking at the doorframe, when I noticed what looked like a hand reaching over onto the door from the other side of the wall. I figured it was just my eyes, but it shook me nonetheless, so I got up to shut the door and check it out. But when I went to move, so did the hand. At this point, I'm convinced it's a hand. I'm not sure if it was fear or what, but I froze, so I couldn't move at all. At this point, I'm at the bottom of the bed. I felt a wave of something come over me, and I had a deep rumbling in my ear. I watched as the outline of a body stepped into my doorway. I couldn't see any of his details because it was like he was radiating that distortion you get from heat. I sat unable to move for what felt like ages. I felt incredibly sick, and my limbs hurt like fire. I thought I'd be running and screaming by now, so I can't tell if fear kept me still or something it was doing. Suddenly, the rumbling got deeper, and I felt the deepest dread I've ever felt in my life. The boy moved his hand off the door frame, only movement in a long time, and took a step towards me. I must have blacked out after that because I awoke to find myself at the foot of my bed. There was a slight indent in the door where the boy placed his hand. I panicked with my parents, who didn't believe a word I said, and I don't blame them. I've since learned it wasn't a mansion I'd stayed in. It was an orphanage, one which recently uncovered tunnels under the building to an underground room and chapel. My life feels like a lie, and frankly, I don't know how I'm still functioning. Let me preface this by saying that although I believe there are things in this universe that are yet to be explained by science, I'm not totally woo-woo. No disrespect intended. I do look for logical explanations, but this I simply can't explain. I was driving down the road, 30 miles an hour limit, doing about 40 miles an hour. It was quiet. No one else was driving up or down the road. Off the road, there were numerous side roads. While driving down the road, I saw a large blue lorry emerge from a side road on the left. They were emerging without stopping at the junction to check for traffic, and they didn't appear to have seen me. I panicked and broke, as it looked like he was about to pull out on me. This is where it gets quite hard to explain. I saw the lorry. I saw the driver not noticing me, and I recognized that I needed to brake to avoid him pulling out in front of me. Yet, I didn't see it. In a split second, the lorry was gone, and then it emerged from the side road again, as if it had never emerged previously. But this time I was doing around 20 miles an hour and was being super cautious. Bear in mind, this all happened within split seconds. As a result of me slowing, the driver in the cabin saw me and slammed his brakes on. He didn't pull out on me. At the time, I was focused on my reactions, but as I travelled further down the road, I said out loud to myself, did I just see that truck emerge from that road twice? I bloody did. That just happened twice. The thing is, if I'd been travelling at 40 miles an hour the second time the lorry driver emerged, I might have been too close to the cabin for him to see me, as naturally he was higher up, and I could have been seriously hurt, or worse. I mean, I drive a Peugeot 107. It's basically a scooter in a thin metal shell. As it happened, me slowing down drastically in response to my first sighting was probably a real saving grace. But what was it? I've tried to rationalize this. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of light. To that, I regret I can only say I know what I saw. It was a fully 3D lorry, and the person's reactions and facial expressions were different both times. Due to my change in reaction, I guess. I've had 3 events of paranormal things happening to me that are engraved in my head, but I'm here to talk about my last experience, which was 2 of the events. Anyways, I was with a good friend of mine. We were just driving around bored and decided to go to a cemetery at midnight to visit a relative's grave. They just passed away. We were driving up and down the rows of tombstones, just talking, when suddenly a bright white light shone through the sunroof of his car. As we kept going, I looked through the side mirror to see there was no light present at all. I started tearing up for no apparent reason as soon as I saw the light. My friend kept reassuring me that there was no light, and we tried to drive by it again. We did, and nothing happened. As we kept driving, we ran into a single small flag in front of a tombstone that was going crazy as if there were strong winds. There was no wind blowing at all. We rolled down the windows to see if there was a breeze or something, but there wasn't, and any other items like flowers or other flags weren't moving at all. Just a single one going crazy. We did one more full drive around the cemetery to see any activity, and at the exact same spot I saw the bright white light, my friend started to look around and asked if I saw the car completely filled with light. I didn't see any light at all this time. After that, we decided it was probably just time to leave. When I was in middle school, my father passed away. My mom couldn't deal with the bad memories that she associated with our house and his illness, so we moved. She bought a brand new house about 1.5 miles away in a newish development area. Behind the house there was a small hill, and at the top a tiny graveyard, fenced in by iron rods. Of course, as a 10 to 11-year-old kid, this was fascinating. The oldest grave was dated 1822. I remember this specifically because I was really into history at the time. There were probably 4 or 5 gravestones, and some of them were clearly kids' graves because of the date of birth and then the day they died. I believe it was between 1 to 3 years old. Months after we moved in, I was home alone at night watching TV. We had a dog and cat at this time, and both were sound asleep in front of me while I laid on the floor. All of a sudden, I had a profound feeling that someone had walked into the room behind me. The only entrance to the living room. The hair raised up on my neck, and I was immediately into fight or flight mode. I turned around, and of course, nothing was there. So I turned back toward the TV, and both the cat and the dog had their ears up, high alert, staring at the doorway. They had been sound asleep before, and at 14 I knew that animals were supposed to be able to sense things that people can't see. My heart absolutely froze, realizing the animals had felt it too. I couldn't move, until after a few minutes I gained the courage to get up and get the phone to nonchalantly call my mom and ask when she was coming home. I could feel these presences enter my room for years while I lived there. There were a few times when I felt something sit on the end of my bed. Not menacing or evil in any way, but distinctly a notable presence. Kind of like the feeling you get when someone is staring at you. My mother is not a liar, but she may be prone to fancy. 10 plus years after we had moved and I graduated college, her and my sister told me they saw a vase lift up vertically from the kitchen table and drop onto the floor at that house. Several years ago, I was living in Eastern Asia and wanted to do some country hopping during my time off. I booked a cheap hostel in Seoul without knowing much about the area or hostel itself, outside of the fact that it was super cheap and appeared accommodating enough for a young solo traveller. I was to share a room with about 10 or 12 other travellers. The room was dark and sparse, consisting of only several heavy iron bunk beds, with curtains as the only means of privacy. I located my bed, which happened to be the top bunk, and climbed the iron ladder to put down my gear. Climbing the ladder made a lot of noise. Each step echoed and reverberated in the tiny room. I stashed my stuff and headed out to explore. I got back very late in the night, climbed up to my bunk, and quickly fell asleep. I don't know how long I'd been sleeping, but I was awoken by the unmistakable sound of someone climbing the iron ladder to my bed. Every step was announced like the ringing of a bell. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and looked toward the end of the bed where the ladder met the bunk. In the corner of the bunk, peering from behind the curtain, was the tiny, bone-white face of a child. It was staring directly at me with black as coal eyes. My automatic reaction was to kick at the face, and just like that it was gone. Now wide awake and sitting upright in bed, rationality began to take over. I thought maybe it was just the neighbour climbing the wrong ladder, but when I leaned over toward his bunk, he was snoring and clearly in a deep sleep. The room was dead silent. Later I find out that beneath the building was a World War II era bomb shelter. So first I'll start with the less crazy stuff. I can sometimes feel whether the teacher chooses me for the answer or not. I just know it somehow. However, this could be due to chance. Now with the real stuff. I can sometimes hear people saying a sentence before they actually say it. This shouldn't be possible, let alone for the fact that I possess no emotional intelligence due to being raised by a narcissistic mother. One example, I was sitting in the bus on the way to school and suddenly heard my math teacher say, as a Christmas gift, we'll write a surprise test. I went to school, had math, we wrote a test and he said exactly the lines. No one expected it. I did. Another thing is that I have dreams of small visual images, such as a symbol in a history book, or a girl having tied her hair with a yellow band in a certain way. I then see these things the next day. One particularly weird thing was that I saw myself playing a game against a player with a certain weapon. Myself with a certain weapon in a savanna biome, barely winning. The next day, it happened exactly that way. The odds of the player having this weapon, me standing exactly at that location, etc., just seem impossible. I also have dreams with ghosts or other creatures warning me about someone calling that I had, and yet again, the other day it happened. This all happens randomly, but I sometimes also have the impulse to do something that later turns out to be useful. For example, I played a hunting game, the Hunter Classic, saw a bear and wanted to shoot it. I had the feeling that I shouldn't do that, and soon after, I saw a huge bear, shot it, and was on the in-game leaderboard at place 3 for a month because of it. My house was built in the 70s. Not particularly new, not particularly old. We moved here in the early 2000s. I don't really know any of the history behind it. We've always joked there are ghosts here. Doors slamming shut, creaking, and things randomly disappearing has always been blamed on ghosts. But around 5 years ago, it started becoming a tad more aggressive. Sounds of light footsteps in the hallway and scratches from the second floor and inside the wall. We have no rodent problems, so it seemed unexplainable to the entire family. Then one day, around 3 or 4 years ago, I was home alone sitting in the living room when a loud bang appeared from the second floor. It was so loud I was worried the upstairs cabinet had fallen down on the floor. When the bang hit, my lights flickered and the TV turned off and on. I could feel the shake all the way from downstairs. I went to check out what had happened, and everything seemed the same. This has happened several times, and it's almost entirely identical. A loud bang, a shake, flickering lights, but nothing happened. What makes this worse is that you can't hear it when you're upstairs. You can only hear it when you're downstairs. I've been called on my phone to stop slamming the door so hard when I'm laying silently in my bed. In the past year, I've started seeing ghosts. I might have just imagined things, but at one point, I saw a toddler sleeping in my brother's bed. I saw her very clearly. She was young, maybe 3 years. She had long blonde hair, and her arm hung over the edge of the bed. When I approached her, she disappeared. This was probably a year ago, but it still spooks me. Then a few weeks ago, I encountered her again. I was home alone when someone knocked on the door. I was a bit confused as I wasn't expecting anyone. As I approached the hallway, I heard the door closing and a young girl saying, "Hello?" Like she had just come home and was announcing her being there. I felt chills run down my back, but I still opened the door to look. My brother is 5, and I figured he might have just come home early, but no one was there. I closed the door today, like properly shut, and then she opened it a bit again. And when I looked at the open door, she shut it close. And now I keep hearing banging sounds from downstairs, and I don't know what to do. I'm like unironically kinda worried. Also, I don't know if this matters, but the dreams I get in this house are always so vivid compared to when I'm not at home. Sometimes I wake up with the sheets off my bed and blanket because I sleep so uneasy. Anyways, I could really do with some advice. I don't think speaking to her works. I tried, and she liked it. Stopped being noisy for a bit, but then she went at it again. Ever since the age of 13, I've seen, heard, and felt things that are unexplainable more times than I can count. I have a family history of mental illnesses, so that could be the reason as to why I had those experiences. So when stuff like that happened, even though I was terrified, I would brush them off as hallucinations. I'm on medicine now that's really helping me, and when I do have hallucinations, they are few and far between. However, this time in particular has me totally confused and thoroughly creeped out. I was 17 at the time. My family and I had just gotten back from vacation really late, and we had all agreed that a shower before going to bed would be really nice. My family is really big. There are 12 in my family, and 8 of us were living in the house. I said I'd take the last shower because I wanted to sit outside and get some time alone. The only light source was one of those street lamps to light our driveway. Our house was in the middle of absolute nowhere. It had been about 15 minutes, and as time passed, an uneasy feeling started to creep into my stomach. I felt like it would probably be a good idea to go inside, but when I heard coyotes yipping and howling somewhere out in the field, I decided to stay outside for a little bit longer and listen to them. That's when pure fear consumed everything in my body. Not even controlling my own body, I slowly looked over the road, and that's when I saw a 10-foot tall figure with elongated arms and legs and giant red eyes gliding down the road, about as fast as a slow-moving car. This thing was really, really thin, was standing completely straight up, and was hovering 1 to 2 feet about the road. I watched in horror as the thing passed by our house without a sound. The whole time, I couldn't move. A couple of minutes later, I finally regained control of my body and ran inside. I didn't tell anyone about it other than my doctor, because I thought it was just another hallucination. A year later, I moved in with my sister and brother-in-law. Well, my brother-in-law and I were on a bike ride at about 11:30 at night, talking about creepy experiences we've had. I started telling him about the Coyote Man, as that was the name I had given him. As I was explaining the features of the thing, his face grew more and more confused as I continued to talk. And just as I was going to talk about the big red eyes that the thing had, his face lit up. I asked him why he was making the face he was, and then he lifted his hands up to his eyes, making large circles with both of them. I started getting creeped out, and that's when he was like, "Big red eyes?" And I immediately started getting the chills. He started to explain that when he was 19, he saw the exact same thing. And right before we saw it, he heard coyotes yipping and howling as well. I was freaking out at this point because I'd never told anyone about it other than my doctor. I thought I was just seeing things. He continued to tell me that the thing actually chased him, and he said that he was absolutely terrified and that it was the fastest he had run his whole life. He said the only way to lose the thing was to climb at the top of the silo. He said he was up there for the rest of the night, just waiting for the thing to show up again, but it never did. I got the chills for minutes on end when he told me that. I have no idea what that thing was, as I've never heard of anything like it since. Every time I think of that experience, I get super creeped out. Just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived, in Southeast Australia, is the opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loves everything to do with nature, and it was summer, so an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees, as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the two of us just kind of sat chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put in on some plastic, and I was keeping an eye on the trees, as I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I've read that a few people have said that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was the same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out, and my adrenaline was up there, but wasn't really anything in my eyeline that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass, where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking it that before I thought was a tree. I got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it was that all sound just ceased, and everything went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path, as this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe. But somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but just slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it. I couldn't look away, but just as it reached the line my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long that reached down near the ground. And all I could make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light, could make out the silhouette of its head, as like a dog or wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break off whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could. Both of us too scared to speak until about half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or fox looking at it. That this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it so chose. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it's definitely changed the way I view the woods and bush. And when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I'll ever see anything like it again.